Now, the problem about this hedge is because a lot of people see it as a kind of physical fence. But let me give you the revelation. The hedge is not a fence. It's not angels, just angels. Okay, they are part of it. But the hedge of God is His presence. The presence of God hovers around His children. That is the hedge. And the presence of God can never be broken. Now, somebody say, what about Job? Let me explain to you why Job's hedge was able to be broken and why the Israelites, the hedge could be broken, and sometimes the enemies can come in and they could be under attack and taken into slavery. These things should not be preached today because it was for the old man, and I'm going to explain why. We are the new creation. The enemy cannot break into our camp. A church that you find which is there, it is not God's church. No, the enemy cannot come in. They can't come in. I will explain further other principles that will help you to understand what I'm trying to communicate. Okay, now in the Old Testament, since man has fallen, there was a promise that a Messiah should come, because what made man man was the Spirit of God, the presence of God. That was about Adam. When he fell, he lost that presence. That presence lifted, and man became weak. He became weak. So when the Israelites had a covenant with God, He promised them His protection, which was His abiding presence. But that presence could not abide with them forever because their nature, their version could not host God's presence. So God rather made a covenant with them and used some elements and things to sustain His holiness around their sinful nature. So that is why they were in covenant with God. So when they breach the covenant or defile any of the elements, the presence of God cannot see the sin, so it gets lifted and the enemies can come in. That was the same thing about Job, the same thing about Israel, about David, about all the men of the Old Testament we talk about. They were in a covenant, and the presence of God was tantamount on a covenant. The same thing that happens with Samson. It was a covenant. The presence was based on a covenant with his hair. He shouldn't cut it. The day he failed, the presence lifted. When the hair was growing, the presence was coming again. It was a covenant, and it shouldn't be based on any special thing. God is God. When the Bible says, in the presence of two immutable things where God cannot fail, whatever He decrees is true. So when God says, my covenant with you is this cloth, it is it. It becomes it, because He is the truth. Whatever He declares becomes the truth. So in the Old Testament, they could not host God's presence because they were sinners. They were not renewed people. They were not born again. So God were in covenant with them, and as long as the covenant holds, His presence hold. When they break the covenant, the presence lift. But we are not in covenant with God. We are the result of the covenant. We were born out of that covenant. We are the children of the covenant, so we are free. We are not under the law of the covenant. We were the ones that came forth through the promise of the Messiah. The covenant came to ensure that man can give birth to God. Because the nature of man, it was impossible for God to die. For God to die, He should become a man. But man was a sinner. It was impossible for him to give birth to God. So God has to establish a covenant, a bridge that will make it possible for Him to cross from His holy realm to our sinful realm. So that was what started the covenant. And when Christ came, the covenant was fulfilled and over.